Hello everyone. The AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate certification is one of the most valuable AWS certifications you can earn, and it's definitely the most popular certification from AWS. Now, jobs in the cloud are growing all the time as more and more companies move workloads to the cloud, and this certification can help you to move into solutions architect positions, which can earn you well over $100,000 a year. Now, in this video, I'm going to walk through some of the details of the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. We'll look at the exam guide. We'll find out who this is for, who should take this exam, what you need in terms of prerequisites before you start your training program. And we're going to go through some example questions so you can have a look at the types of questions you're going to see if you sit this exam, so you can understand the style of the questions, what's included, and how difficult they are. So let's get into it. Now, this is the webpage on the AWS website for the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate, also known as the SAA exam. So some of the fundamentals: this is an associate level exam. Now, that means that you should be more of an intermediate level. I would recommend that before you do the Solutions Architect Associate, you do have some fundamental experience in technology, in the IT world, and perhaps even the Cloud Practitioner certification. That's the foundational certification. And that's a good exam to do before you come and do this exam, because this is quite substantially harder than the Cloud Practitioner. Now, the exam length is 130 minutes. You've got 65 questions. These are multiple choice or multiple response. So there's no sort of hands-on exercises here. It's purely answering questions, choosing which of the responses are correct for that particular scenario. And these are scenario-based questions. I'll show you some examples shortly, so you'll see what I mean by that. Now, the exam price is $150 US. If you've previously passed an AWS exam, so perhaps you've done your Cloud Practitioner, then you do get 50% off your next exam. So that's very useful. And you can do this either online or in an exam center. So let's just scroll down a little way. And what I'm going to do is just expand some of these. So who should take this? Now, AWS do recommend that you have at least a year hands-on experience designing cloud solutions. Well, what if you don't have any kind of architectural design experience in the cloud? Not a problem. Okay, I do say, as I mentioned before, I do say that people should actually have something like the Cloud Practitioner level of expertise before they come into this, but some people do start with this as their first certification, especially those who have IT experience already. So they might come from some other job role outside of cloud computing, and because they got that IT experience, it's a little easier to pick up the concepts. And scrolling down to the next point here, how will this exam help your career? Well, as AWS state here, this certification ranks among the top 10 certifications of 2023, and there is some information here. They do link out to this salary report. Now, I haven't checked that one out, but there's plenty of different ways you can find salary expectations and reporting information on the internet. Just search for AWS Solutions Architect Salary, and you'll be taken to some of the websites like Glassdoor, for example, and you'll be able to see what the salary ranges are. Now, what I'll do now is I'm going to go across to the exam guide itself. So if I scroll down a little way, we should find a link. In fact, it might be up a little way on this page to the actual exam guide. Here it is, review the exam guide. So the exam guide goes into quite a lot of detail of what you're going to find on the exam. So this is essentially the blueprint for the exam. Now, the code for the exam is SAA C03. That's the code. So when you book your exam, make sure you're booking the correct exam. This is the Solutions Architect Associate. Don't book the professional level. Make sure it's SAA C03. So let's just scroll down a little way. I want to get down to the actual exam domains. So if we scroll down here, these are the domains. So these actually correlate very well to the sort of core principles of architecture. We want to make sure our architectures are secure, that they're resilient, that they are high performing, and that they are cost optimized, always ensuring that we're aligning with the requirements of the customer. Now, when we get into the exam questions, you'll see that those types of requirements do come through, like perhaps cost optimization is more important to one company than another one. Another company might say, well, resilience is much more important to us because of the types of systems that we run. So you have to make sure that you read the questions carefully, because that does change the answer in some cases. So we find that the exam is broken into these 4 domains, and the exam guide will then go into some of the detail on this. Now, it's going to be a bit boring if I actually went through and read through all this. There's a lot here. Essentially, there's quite a few different task statements which define which topics are likely to appear on the exam. And if we scroll down, you can see there's a lot of them. Now, the coverage on the exam in terms of AWS services is very broad, and for this exam, it's fairly deep as well. If you do the Cloud Practitioner certification, it also has very broad coverage of many, many different services, but only at a very shallow level. Here, you're going more into implementation. So you'll see a lot of words around building, designing, transforming data, that sort of thing. So now we're getting much more into both design, but also implementation as well. So if I scroll down, still going further, you can see there's a lot of exam requirements here. There's a lot of different skills that you need for this exam. And what we're going to find now is the technologies and concepts that might appear on the exam. So these are the sort of categories. Now here under in-scope AWS services and features, we can see the actual AWS services that may appear on the exam. Now, not all of them will appear on your exam, but they could do. Okay, well, now what we will actually find is that there's quite a heavy weighting towards some services over others. So for example, we're going to get some coverage of these analytics services. We're going to get quite a bit of coverage of services in the application integration space like SQS, step functions, maybe SNS. Probably a little less on AppFlow and AppSync, but they may appear in 1 or 2 questions. We've got cost management here, we've got compute, of course, EC2 and auto scaling. They're going to be much more heavily weighted in the exam versus AWS Wavelength, for example, which maybe appears in 1 question. So there's definitely a quorum of services that you need to know in a lot of depth, and there's other ones where you just need to know a bit about it. And we try to make sure in our training courses that we cover to the right depth so that we don't sort of overload you. Otherwise, you'll be training for months and months just for this 1 exam. Now, again, I'm not going to read through every one of these. You can see there's a lot of services. I think at the last count, there was over 150 services. So it is a lot, but quite a few of these probably won't appear on your exam because they come up in the odd question here and there, and the questions are randomized in such a way that you might not see coverage of quite a few of these services. So don't worry too much about that. Just make sure that you're enrolled in a very good training program that makes sure that it covers the correct services at the right depth. So that is the exam guide. It's a good reference point, especially when you're in your training, making sure that you come back to the exam guide and just look through it and just check. Maybe there's something that's missed. It's very hard for all training programs to be completely up to date with every service or every feature that appears on the exam. So it's always worth sort of coming back and just double checking here if there's anything that you think was missed. Now, let's have a look at some example exam questions, and I'm going to walk you through these questions and help you to understand how I go about answering questions in the exam, the process that I take, and things to look out for. Okay, so here is the first question. Now, I mentioned earlier that the questions are scenario-based. So they're going to give you a scenario, essentially a scenario that you might come across if you were an architect and a company has said to you, we need you to help us with this solution or this problem, and you have to actually think through and work out what the best solution to that particular series of requirements is. So let's read through this one. A company runs an application in a private subnet within a VPC. The application's integrated with Cognito using a user pool for user authentication, and the company wants to enable users to securely upload and store their documents in an S3 bucket. What combination of steps should the company take to securely integrate the application with Amazon S3? Now, we've got to make sure that we understand some particular keywords. We have to go back and reread the question. I usually read through it and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to look for what are the very, very important information that I need to keep in mind as I work through the different answers here to identify the correct one. Firstly, the application is in a private subnet. Okay, now I can't assume therefore that it has internet connectivity. It probably doesn't. Okay, so it's securely situated in a private subnet. Now, Cognito is used for sign in and sign up for mobile applications, web-based applications, that kind of thing. So we're using that for user authentication. Now, note that the company wants to enable users to securely upload their documents and store them in an S3 bucket. So, we could do a couple of things here. For example, With EC2 and a private subnet, we could deploy a NAT gateway. Now, I do notice by scanning the answers that's not included. And one of the reasons for that would be that wouldn't be the most secure way of configuring this solution, okay? Because a NAT gateway does actually use the internet. So it uses an internet gateway, and that's not as good as using a private connection. So if I want to securely connect EC2 to Amazon S3, and I'm going to use a user pool for authentication, then what do I need to do in terms of making sure that we have both user authentication and authorization? So we've got the authentication, then we have authorization to be able to access whatever services are required for that application within AWS, and then making sure that the networking is secure and adding security wherever we can. Okay, so let's work through the answers. Now, I'll start at the top. So configure an Amazon Cognito identity pool to provide temporary credentials for S3 when users authenticate through the user pool. That makes a lot of sense. We know that user pools are used for authentication, principally, and the identity pools are another feature of Cognito, and that's used for authorization. So that's actually gaining temporary credentials. So that makes a lot of sense. The next one, enable S3 VPC endpoints in the VPC to ensure private connectivity between the application and the S3 bucket. Well, that also looks good because that solves the problem that I mentioned before, where we don't necessarily want to use the internet. Not that a NAT gateway is even mentioned here, but that also makes sense. Okay, I'm not going to finish there, even if I think those both look like good answers. And by the way, I do need to select 2 here. Okay, so make sure that you select the correct number of answers. Let's go through the rest. I always want to read every question, every answer very carefully, reread every question, make sure that I'm not making any mistakes. So let's check answer C. Add a bucket policy to deny requests that do not include valid Amazon Cognito credentials. Well, yes, you can use conditions in bucket policies to look for certain information, to check for certain conditions to be either true or false, and then you could potentially deny based on that. But actually, I don't believe that you can do this with the Amazon Cognito credentials. So that would not necessarily be a condition that you would be able to configure in a bucket policy. And the next one is assign IAM roles directly to the S3 bucket to allow user level access. Well, that's not correct, as IAM roles are assigned to entities like users or identity pools, not to resources like S3 buckets. The last one is configure the application to generate S3 access tokens directly from the user pool. Well, that wouldn't work because user pools authenticate users, but they don't directly provide credentials for AWS services. An identity pool is required to bridge the authentication process with AWS resource access. So based on all this, I do believe that both A and B here are the correct answers. Okay, let's see another question. A media company is building a video content distribution platform on AWS. The platform uses a REST API hosted on Amazon API Gateway to serve metadata about the videos, such as titles and descriptions. The metadata is confidential and must be accessible only from a specific set of trusted IP addresses belonging to the company's office network. Which solution will meet these requirements? Now, if you have come into this exam with the correct level of expertise, so you've got yourself up to a good level of understanding, you should already start having an idea of how you might solve this problem without even reading the answers. Okay, so in fact, we even touched upon it a little bit in the previous question. So what I'm going to do is just read through the answers again, and let's try and work this out. Again, I'll just start at the top, work my way down. A, deploy the API gateway in a private subnet and configure a network ACL to permit traffic only from the trusted IP addresses. Now, you need to understand how you can deploy APIs. There are ways that you can deploy APIs securely in a private network, but you can't really deploy an API in a private subnet. Okay, you don't define a subnet within a VPC and deploy an API gateway REST API there. That's just not possible. So that means that one sounds like nonsense to me. The next one, set up API gateway with a private integration and restrict access to the trusted IP addresses using a VPC endpoint policy. Well, yes, you can create private integrations, but that's only for resources that are within the VPC. That's the point of using a privately deployed API. So that doesn't make too much sense here either. The third one, C is modify the API gateway security group to allow inbound requests only from the trusted IP addresses. Well, if you've worked with APIs and you've practiced using some hands-on labs, then you'll know that you do not deploy security groups with API gateway. So that one also doesn't make sense. It's really useful if you can eliminate every incorrect answer and then even just by that process work out which one is the correct answer. So I haven't even read the last one, but I know it's the correct answer because A, B, and C are incorrect because I know that there's a problem with each of those answers. So now we move on to D, configure an API gateway resource policy that denies access to any IP address that's not explicitly allowed. Now that is definitely possible with a REST API, so I'm going to go with that solution. Let's move on to the third question, and quite wordy. We've got lots of words on the screen here. By the way, this is not the longest question you'll see. It's not the shortest either. You'll get some questions where there's just a bit less text, and you'll get some that are quite long and wordy. Don't worry too much about the longer ones. They're not necessarily more difficult. It's just more words, so just make sure you read carefully all the entire question and the answers once or twice before you make your best guess and move on. So a social media platform uses DynamoDB to store user profiles, friend connections, and post interactions. The platform's rapidly expanding to new countries and needs to ensure a seamless user experience with high availability and low latency for a global user base. And the platform must handle unpredictable workloads and regional outages while maintaining a cost-effective architecture. Which solution will meet these requirements most cost effectively? Now, of course, cost effectiveness has been mentioned twice here. And be very careful, especially with that last part, the very last sentence there, which solution will meet these requirements most cost effectively. This is where AWS will often make sure that they've articulated to you the most important requirement, and you need to follow that. What some people do is they get too idealistic and they say, well, I like this solution better, it's more elegant, it has better high availability. Well, so what? If AWS are telling you that you have to choose the most cost-effective solution, don't choose the most resilient solution. Choose the most cost-effective. If they tell you that they want the most resilient solution, that's different. But make sure you follow what you're being told here. This is the requirement. This is the same as if you're in the world with a customer. In the customer, you can give them some feedback and say, you realize that this is going to be cost effective, but it's not going to be as resilient as if I did this other thing. And then they can look at the cost of implementing that other option and decide. In this case, you don't have that back and forth, so you just got to do what you're told. All right, so let's read the answers. First one, deploy DynamoDB tables in a single region using provision capacity mode. Use DynamoDB streams to replicate data asynchronously to a secondary region for failover. Okay, seems a bit strange to use DynamoDB streams in this scenario. That's not a solution that I've seen being used before. I guess you could do that. You could replicate some data. Where is it going to end up? You're going to have to store it somewhere, and that's not necessarily mentioned here because the data has to be stored in some kind of format in some storage solution. It's not in DynamoDB. It can't stay in the stream forever. So you then have to process it. Sounds a bit complicated for a failover. Yes, I want it to be cost effective. Maybe that's cost effective, but at the same time, is it even doable? The next one, use S3 to store user data and replicate the data across multiple regions using cross-region replication. Use Lambda to perform real-time updates for the application. Okay, we're looking for low latency global user base. I don't think S3 is a good solution for this. I am leaning towards DynamoDB, which is obviously in the other answers as well. So this is actually talking about changing the storage location. Now, both DynamoDB and S3 are key value stores. So I guess you could store the data in S3, but it's probably more suitable in DynamoDB. And that's going to give you the ability to store more data, more attributes along with each item in the table. So I don't think S3 is the right solution here. Let's move on. Use global tables with DynamoDB to replicate data automatically across multiple regions. Deploy the tables in on-demand capacity mode to handle workload variability. That seems to make sense. Global tables has asynchronous replication across regions. It means the data is going to all be stored in DynamoDB. It's actually multi-master, so you can make changes in any of those regions as well, which makes it very easy to fail over and even fail back again very easily in a outage from one region. You can also support low latency by ensuring that the data is replicated to different parts of the world if you have a global user base, and then you're getting it closer to users. So I like that solution. The last one, use DynamoDB Accelerator DAX to reduce read latency for frequently accessed items and deploy DynamoDB tables in a single region and use manual cross-region replication to replicate data to other regions for fault tolerance. Now, DAX is definitely a good solution for reducing read latency, but it will for sure increase the cost fairly significantly. So that's probably an issue, though it could be good for performance. Deploy DynamoDB tables in a single region and use cross-region replication. That's not so good. Okay, so I don't like that solution using cross-region replication. I think a global table is much more suitable. I don't think DAX is good either. So let's go with C for this one. Okay, the last question I'm going to cover here. A genomics research organization is building an application to analyze large data sets. Raw genomic data is stored in an S3 bucket, processed by multiple EC2 instances, and the results are stored in a separate S3 bucket. The application frequently transfers large amounts of data between EC2 instances during analysis. The organization wants to reduce overall data transfer costs while maintaining efficient data processing. What should the solutions architect do to achieve this? So what we have here is EC2 instances pulling data from S3, and then they're processing that data, and there's a lot of inter-instance activity. Now, we've now got to figure out what are the costs here. And you need to understand all of the different cost mechanisms within AWS. You need to understand, what do you pay for? For example, do you pay for networking? Well, yes, you do, but only in certain scenarios. You don't pay for transferring data into AWS. You do pay for transferring it out of AWS or between availability zones or regions. So that's probably where we're going to get some cost here if we don't deploy this solution correctly. So let's look through the answers. The first one, configure an auto-scaling group to launch EC2 instances in multiple regions to distribute the processing workload. Well, why do you need to distribute the processing workload across multiple regions? That's more of a high availability and disaster recovery requirement. You don't need to distribute the workload across regions unless you have one of those requirements. You could quite easily just deploy them in one or multiple AZs within a region, and you're still distributing it just across different instances. So I don't like that one. B, use an EFA, an Elastic Fabric adapter, to enable high-speed data transfer between EC2, reducing transfer costs. Well, an EFA is good for this type of application. It will provide very high throughput, but it's not cheaper. It's going to add cost. So higher performance typically means higher cost. Now, how does it reduce transfer costs between EC2 instances? Well, it doesn't. That's nonsense. So in fact, it's about where you deploy your instances. That's the most important thing. And I can see the next answer is something that might help us here. So deploy the instances in the same AZ, the same availability zone. That's going to eliminate cross-AZ transfer charges. That's correct. So the EFA is not going to reduce cost. It might help with performance, but for cost, we should deploy them in one AZ, and then we don't have those cross-AZ charges from a networking perspective. Now let's just check the last answer, though I'm pretty sure it's not correct. D, use Amazon S3 transfer acceleration to optimize the transfer of data between the EC2 instances and the S3 buckets. Again, we're about optimizing speed here, not reducing cost. So that's not really what we're looking for. So yes, the answer is C. I hope you enjoyed this video on the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate Exam, and hopefully now you have a good understanding of what this exam actually entails and what the questions are going to look like. I'm sure you'll agree that the questions are not easy, and so it definitely requires a good amount of preparation and training and hands-on practice before you go and sit the exam. Now, if you're looking for some assistance with that, definitely have a look at the links in the description of this video. We've got lots of AWS training courses for a variety of different certifications, including this one, and live bootcamp training as well for those who are really serious about accelerating their career in the cloud.